In the name of the one God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sanctifier. Please be seated. It was Lancelot Andrews, the second most distinguished Bishop of Chichester after St. Richard himself, who in a Christmas sermon of 1622 before King James on the Epiphany coined the phrase, "It was a cold coming they had of it," which T.S. Eliot used in his great poem, The Journey of the Magi, one of many intriguing poems on the subject, for although shepherds are very picturesque in their way, particularly when lit by and entertained by the heavenly host, the protagonists in the Epiphany are exotic men of mystery. There's been much speculation about whether they were wise men or kings, how many there were, and from whence they came. I don't suppose it matters much in the end, but for what it's worth, I'm convinced they were rulers of some sort on the basis that no wise man worth his salt would have anything to do with gold, which could only be got as the result of the use of slave labor and the loss of much blood. Indeed, for me, it's their very venality, their pomp and circumstance, which lends such importance to their worship of the Christ child. It would be nothing much for wise men to worship the Messiah, but this fall from gold to grace is deeply attractive, and it speaks to our times. There's a great deal of easy talk in Christian circles about the evils of consumer society, the power of money, and the lowering of standards, as if this were happening in a world at the other side of our windows, of which we are unhappy, helpless, and spectators. But insidious self-delusion of the sort that I think we suffer from is much worse than the shouting of the pantomime villain. We have all more or less bought into the consumer society. And when we come to worship the Christ child, we don't bring him our gold, we leave it at home, persuading ourselves that the world of gold and the world of God are totally separate worlds. But for all these men had a hard time reaching Jerusalem, what with the bad weather, the hostile receptions, the indifferent eating and sleeping arrangements, and the fractiousness of the camels, hardship is relative. I venture to say that I did not have the same bad time, for instance, as Christians from Western Europe walking to Jerusalem in the 12th century. Likewise, for all current woes, our hardship is relatively light compared with that suffered by most people in the world. We all know this, so what's the point? Surely designing league tables of hardship doesn't get us very far. The point for me is that for whatever cause, these men were drawn by an irresistible power to get out of their comfort zone, their palatial and jurisdictional comfort zone, to go out into a world from whose unpleasantness they had been protected, and instead of giving and receiving ceremonial presents in one palace or another, they made gifts to a child with mysterious properties they did not claim to understand. And then they went home, older, and, Eliot suggests, just a little wiser. My own point is neither very subtle nor very difficult. If we are to worship this mysterious child, then we need to get outside our own comfort zones, not least because the knowledge of that child within our own country is vanishing fast. I think we can safely and sadly say that our country has almost completely lost any notion of the Christian significance of Easter. But Christmas is also rapidly going the same way, so that nativity plays are on a par with pantomime. A desperate young couple, a cruel innkeeper, angels, shepherds, Herod the villain, and 3 exotic kings. The only difference is that the nativity play has an untidy ending, and it seems not to end happily ever after. But still, I'm struck forcibly by the way that Christmas seems to have got cut off from the rest of Christianity. For all that, it's our last hope. Without it, we will be an aging, shrinking sect. What then are we to do? Well, for a start, we have to admit that what we are doing now, what we have been doing throughout our lifetimes, is not really working. So the first answer has to be to try something new, or, in my earlier phrase, we have to get outside our comfort zone. Here I'm not suggesting that we abandon our home, start making mad excursions, but what I am suggesting is that we each need a new perspective on our Christian faith. We need to read different books of the Bible. We need to read different translations of the Bible. We need to read different commentaries of the Bible and different works of study. We need to consider a worldly subject we have not considered before. Not something that's only of private use, but something of public use. When we make a moral decision about politics, how much do we really know? Do we ever try a different newspaper? Do we ask why some countries are rich and others are poor? Do we even know the most fundamental facts about places in the news? Do we even know the history of our country's relationship with countries currently in trouble? Do we think that we can know our own history if we leave out big chunks that are unpalatable? These may seem to be distant concerns from our church, but our church too often seems distant from the world. We, the most educated people who have ever lived, are sleepwalking into global disaster and moral bankruptcy for want of a little intellectual and spiritual effort. We don't think enough, and we don't pray enough. We don't ask enough questions, and we accept too many glib answers without being clear what they really mean. We love our church dearly, but not fiercely. And perhaps too, we love it too much as it is, and not as it might be. These are hard words for hard times, but I have never felt that the world needs to lay its gifts at the feet of Jesus as it does now. So many of us are little kings. So many of us have so much. But so many of us cling to our palaces and our ceremonies. We don't, in the modern terminology, we don't get out enough. Let this be our year for journeying, for exploration, for learning something new, for knowing what to give and how to give. Nothing is too small, and if we each do something, the change will be very great. Amen.